All right, well, like my dad said, nobody really likes to suffer, but that is what we're talking about today. And so the question I want to ask you, maybe you've asked it yourself, but what do you do when you're suffering? What do you do when you're suffering? And last summer, I had the opportunity to work out at a Christian service camp up in Como, Colorado. And it was a pretty good gig. I got to hang out with students, talk about Jesus, rock climb, mountain bike, all those kinds of things. And of course, eat cafeteria food all summer. It was the dream. And each week we were given 24 hours off to which we could do whatever we wanted. And it was up in the mountains. And so my friends and I decided that we'd spend that time climbing mountains up in the Rockies. However, it wasn't all kicks and giggles. It had its hard moments, its hard situations. But overall, the summer was well worth it. And I remember one specific weekend where we decided that we would climb a mountain called Pyramid Peak. And we got off of work that day around 1 or 2 in the afternoon. And we grabbed all of our gear and we put it into my cousin's Jeep. And then we went and grabbed a cooler and filled it with ice and water and put it also in the Jeep. And we went on our way. And we drove for about 2 or 3 hours over Independence Pass into the Elk Range near Aspen, Colorado. And that night when we got there, we decided that we would spend the night on the soft concrete in the parking lot and that we would wake up well before the sun the next day. So the next morning, we woke up to a sky swarmed with stars at a breezy 4 a.m. We ate our Cliff Bars, and then we began our trek. And this hike was supposed to be somewhere a little over 8 miles round trip and somewhere between 4,500 and 5,000 feet of elevation gain. And most hikes in Colorado begin the same way. They all begin with a stage that my friends and I deemed the butterfly hike. It's relatively flat, not too steep, maybe steep here and there, maybe a little uphill, but for the most part, it's pretty nice. You can enjoy the butterflies and the scenery as you walk. And so we had just gotten past this part and began the actual climb, and almost immediately I began to struggle. Each step felt like a full body workout. My lungs were constantly trying to catch up with the rhythm of my heart. It was miserable. And we walked on and we kept going, and it felt like I was breathing through a straw that had been crunched up and twisted around until there was just a little bit of oxygen coming through it. And so after that happened, we kept walking, and we cut a path through the gray rocks in front of us, and we trudged through the snow as the morning went on. And then I remember stopping, and I remember looking back and seeing the first rays of light come over the mountains. I remember seeing the sunrise that morning, and it was beautiful. And I remember thinking to myself, man, we've come a long ways. I remember seeing the lake from which we started and thinking, that kind of looks like a puddle at this point. And so we go on and we pass through these huge gray pillars, these stone pillars that were built up by other hikers that wanted to mark the trail, our only guide on the hike. And as we hiked, we stopped only for water here and there. And then we finally came to a point, and I saw it. And I looked up, and there in front of me was something beautiful, yet terrible. It looked as if the mountain peak had set itself on fire. And there to the left of the peak was a gully. And that gully was where our trail was. It had been carved out by water or wind or whatever, and somebody decided that it would be a good idea to blaze a trail up it. And so when we finally made it to the base of the gully, I was beyond exhausted. I was beat, worn. My energy was running low. I dreamed of naps and of home-cooked meals and an ice-cold Dr. Pepper, but instead we took a sip of some lukewarm water and we began our ascent, and I can honestly say it was terrible. I could feel my lungs. They felt like they were about to burst. I could feel my pulse in my skull. I could hear the wind howling in my ears. I could actually literally touch the trail in front of me, the places where my feet would soon be as I stood up. I was basically crawling up a hill on all fours. And I remember asking myself many times, how am I going to get to the top? How could I possibly get to the peak? Then I remember asking myself, why in the world did I decide to do this? And I would look up and I would see my friends in front of me, beckoning me on further up the trail than me, and I would sweep my hand in dismissal to them. I would tell them, no, you guys go on, I'll catch up. I didn't want their help. And I would go on to blame my lack of motivation on external factors, the meal that I ate the day before, or the amount of sleep I got the previous night, or the fact that my Aunt Sandy just makes such good cookies and I couldn't help myself and I ate too many. But none of it was my fault. And step after painful step we would climb. Eventually, I would succumb to my pain. Thoughts course through my brain, this is who I am. I'm not strong enough. I'm too weak. This mountain has beaten me. And I would identify myself with my pain as I sulked my way up the mountain. But after every negative thought, after every sweep of dismissal or finger pointed in accusation, after every dry gulp in the back of my throat, I would look up and I would see my friends. I would see my cousin Jared and my good friend Ian, still beckoning me on, still urging me forward. I would hear their encouragement above my hopelessness. So step after step we went on. We walked for what seemed like an eternity. And I remember coming to the last stretch. I remember feeling and seeing the last few stones. I remember rising over the backside of Pyramid Peak and seeing the view that had been placed before me, which was that last picture that you saw. I remember standing on the edge of the world, scaring my mother back home. I remember looking at the distance that I had just covered. And I remember forgetting my suffering that I had just been through in order to enjoy the view that God had placed before me. And I remember embracing my friend Ian. I remember giving a high five to my cousin Jared. I remember smiling, laughing, sitting, breathing, resting, and you better believe I remember eating up there. But most of all, I remember sitting on top of Pyramid Peak at 7:26 a.m., relieved. My suffering was over. So what do you do when you're suffering? What do you do when you're in pain? What do you do when you're beaten? What do you do when life gets hard? What do you do when you've just tried so hard, come so far, but you realize that you're not where you want to be? What do you do when you are in a rhythm of taking step after monotonous step, trying to overcome something in your life, but the world around you is simply suffocating you with pain and anxiety? Tell me, what do you do when you're suffering? If you have your Bibles this morning, or if you don't, there's one in the pew in front of you, or grab your phone and turn to Ruth chapter 1, verse 6. Ruth 1, verse 6. And this summer, as my dad said, we've been going through this series titled Legends. And last week, my dad kicked off the final segment of this series where we talk about Ruth. And he talked about the fact that the wrong direction always leads to the wrong destination. So today I'd like to pick up where he left off. And at this point in the story, Naomi and her two sons and her husband Elimelech have moved from Israel to Moab and left God's provision. And sometime after that, the father Elimelech, he dies. And the two boys go on to marry two Moabite women, which would have been frowned upon at the time. One's name is Orpah, and the other's name is Ruth. And 10 years later, these two sons would follow their father to the grave, leaving these three women hopeless, hungry, suffering, experiencing loss on a degree that I will never understand. And they're left alone at the bottom of the caste system, unable to provide for themselves. An uncontrollable storm has touched down in the center of their lives of an unrelenting nature. And that's where our text picks up today, amidst a storm of suffering. So follow along with me, if you would. Ruth 1, verse 6. Said, when Naomi heard in Moab that the Lord had come to the aid of his people by providing food for them, she and her daughters-in-law prepared to return home from there. With her two daughters-in-law, she left the place where she had been living and set out on the road that would take them back to the land of Judah. Then Naomi said to her two daughters-in-law, go back, each of you, to your mother's home. May the Lord show you kindness as you have shown kindness to your dead husbands and to me. May the Lord grant that each of you will find rest in the home of another husband. Then she kissed them goodbye, and they wept aloud, and they said to her, no, we will go back with you to your people. But Naomi said, return home, my daughters.
Why would you want to come with me? Am I going to have more sons who could become your husbands? Return home. My daughters, I'm too old to have another husband, even if I thought there was still hope for me. Even if I had a husband tonight and then gave birth to sons, would you wait until they grew up? Would you remain unmarried for them? No, my daughters. It is more bitter for me than for you because the Lord's hand has turned against me. And at this they wept aloud again, but then Orpah kissed her mother-in-law goodbye, but Ruth clung to her. Look, said Naomi, your sister-in-law is going back to her people and her gods. Go back with her. But Ruth replied, don't urge me to leave you or to turn my back from you. No, where you go, I will go. Where you stay, I will stay. Your people will be my people, and your God, my God. Where you die, I will die, and there I will be buried. And may the Lord deal with me, be it ever so severely, if even death separates you and me. When Naomi realized that Ruth was determined to go with her, she stopped urging her. So the two women went on until they came to Bethlehem, and when they arrived in Bethlehem, the whole town was stirred because of them. And the woman exclaimed, can this be Naomi? Don't call me Naomi, she told them. Call me Mara, because the Almighty has made my life very bitter. I went away full, but the Lord has brought me back empty. Why call me Naomi? The Lord has afflicted me. The Almighty has brought misfortune upon me. So Naomi returned from Moab, accompanied by Ruth the Moabite, her daughter-in-law, arriving in Bethlehem as the barley harvest was beginning. And so here we have these three women amidst their suffering. However, the question still stands, what do you do when you're suffering? And in our text today, we see three reactions to suffering from Naomi. I would say three negative reactions to suffering. And the first reaction to suffering is dismissal. It's dismissal. You see, without a doubt, Naomi has suffered a great amount. Like to lose one's husband, that's a great enough loss. But to also lose her only two sons, how is she still standing? How is she possibly going back to a land blessed by God? How is she still going? However, if you read the text, how does she react? She goes to her daughters-in-law and she says, go home. Get out of here. Go on. Leave me in my pitiful state. I hope your lives end better than mine. She takes the one good thing in her life, her only source of encouragement and love, and she wishes it away. You know, why did she do that? How could she possibly do that to these poor women? It's a selflessness. It is look, I know what I'm going through, and I really just don't think you can take it. I know the pain and suffering that surrounds my life, and, I don't want to be a burden. She is saying, compared to me, you guys are living well. Go back to the hope that you have. I will return to my despair. However, it also would have been shameful for Naomi to return to her home without a husband, without her two sons, and instead escorting these two Moabite women to which she had allowed to marry into her Israelite family. So Naomi isolates herself while trying to protect others. Why is that such a bad thing? It's once explained to me like this. Once was an old man and a preacher, and the older gentleman stopped going to church. So the preacher started asking around where this man was, and all the families in the church gave him different responses. Oh, the crowd's too young. He doesn't really fit in here. Or, oh, the music's too loud. He just really doesn't enjoy it. Or, no, he's on vacation visiting one of his friends. Turns out no one knew where this man was. And so the preacher would drive past his house every single day on his way to the church for work, and he would see his car sitting in the driveway every day. And as the week went on, the mailbox began to fill up, and the car began to get more dirty. And so the preacher decided that the next Sunday, before the sun would come up, that he would go to this man's house and check if he was all right. And so Sunday came, and he went to his house and knocks on the door, and a grunt signaled him to come in. And he walks in, and there in his recliner, watching the fire blaze in the fireplace, is this older gentleman. He asked him if he's all right, how he's doing, and there was no reply. So he asked him something else, but sure enough, it was met with silence as well. So they just sat there, and they watched the fire blaze in the fireplace as the sun came up through the window. And after several moments had passed, as the preacher finally realized what was going on, he got up and he grabbed the tongs and he took a coal out of the fire and he placed it on the fireplace. And he let the cool breeze rush over it. Eventually, the coal would begin to grow dark. Soon it would not emit any light at all, and eventually it would go completely out as the fire burned just inches away from it. And at that moment, the preacher grabbed his coat and got up and he went on to church. And as the week went on, he passed his house and he noticed the mail had been collected. And the next day, he noticed that the car had been washed and waxed and it sparkled in the sunlight. And the day after that, he noticed a new car in the driveway. He recognized it as one of the families in the church as he saw their little boy and little girl playing tag out in the yard in front of his house. And that Sunday, as he drove to church, before the sun came up, he noticed that the fire in the living room was burning brighter and bigger than ever as it shot sparks into the dawn sky. And that morning, as he got up to preach, he saw there in the front row an older gentleman surrounded by a young family. 2 little kids at his knees, awed by this man's story. And on a face that once wore sorrow, that flickered in the flame, a smile came to this older gentleman's face, brought joy to the preacher. You see, people are bound to each other. They are closest when they decide not to be far from one another. Naomi is no different. She needed people around her when she was suffering, yet her first reaction to this is to dismiss everyone. However, it does not stop there, for the second reaction to suffering that she has is accusation. So first she dismisses everybody out of her side, and then she begins to throw out these wild accusations. And I imagine she starts with a very familiar question to us, one we ask a lot. It's the question, why? Why did this happen to me? Why was there famine? Why was there so much pain, so much suffering? And after all the evidence had been collected, in her broken state, she takes her finger and she points it to the heart of God. And she says, His hand of provision, of comfort, of safety, it has been taken away from me. And in her first statement, in verse 21, she's so quick to brush over her responsibility for these circumstances, simply to blame someone else for them. We don't do that, do we? And she pegs it correctly with the first statement. She says, I went away. If she would have stopped there, it would have been accurate. I walked away from God's provision. I turned my back on His blessing. I denied God my trust in His provision. However, I like the way my dad put it last week and when he said, right theology, wrong conclusion. God does work in this world, and He works in our suffering and amidst our pain. However, I've come to believe that God does not make the messes. He simply cleans them up. Like a mother cleaning up after a bunch of toddlers, God is constantly picking up after us. Right theology, God works in this world, and He's powerful enough to take care of us when we're suffering. Wrong conclusion. God causes all the pain and suffering in this world. So we found that dismissal leads to isolation. That accusation leads to open hostility. But Naomi gives yet one more reaction to her suffering that I want to look at. And the third reaction to suffering Naomi gives is identification. She takes her eyes and she surveys the situation. And then she takes her ears and she listens to the lies of her identification. The name Naomi means pleasant, sweet, friendly. And Naomi says, do not call me that. See, I'm no longer that person. I have let my situation become my identification. We don't do that either, do we? No, call me Mara, for I'm bitter. And she takes her pain, her suffering, the negative parts of her life, and she says, that's who I am now. I am my pain and nothing more. She puts herself in a box, in a pit. She's unable to escape on her own. Can you really blame her, though? I mean, after all that she's gone through, right? After all the pain and suffering she's experienced, do you really blame her? Like, she's been stripped of her core, of her identity, of her people group. Do you really blame her? Where else would she put her identity if not in her family? But listen very carefully to me. If your identity is found in anything that is fallen or broken, your identity will eventually reflect it. Like if your identity is found in a man, or a woman or your job or your success or the amount of money you make, whatever it is, if your identity is found in anything, if your hope is found in any of those things, you will eventually be left hopeless. You will be left in a pit, unable to escape, with lies being shouted at you from every direction. This is who you are. You can't escape this. Who do you think you are? You don't even know who you are. Stuck in your stupor of suffering. So are these the only options? I mean, is this all we get? Are these the only things we can do whenever you're suffering, to accuse, to dismiss, or to identify with your pain? But if you look in this passage, there's one final reaction to suffering. And I believe it's the right one. It doesn't come from the mother, from the daughter. It comes from Ruth, the real hero of this story. And as Ruth watches this bitter woman, hardened by her pain, she stands by as Naomi accuses a God that's foreign to her. She listens as she is told to go home, to get out of here, as Naomi tries to isolate herself, as she identifies with her pain. And then as tears stream down her face, she clenches her jaw, a feeling not foreign to her, for she had been through much of the same that Naomi had. She reaches down in her soul, and without thinking much, she looks at Naomi and she says, "Do not urge me to leave you, or to turn my back from you. No, where you go, I will go. Where you stay, I will stay. Your people will be my people, and your God, my God. Where you die, I will also die, and there beside you I will be buried, and may the Lord deal with me, be it ever so severely. If even death separates me from you." See, this is not a posture of dismissal or of accusation or identification. No, Ruth embraces Naomi. She opens her arms wide and she embraces her. Everything about her, her pain, her sorrow, her home, her people, her God, even her death. And it takes a foreigner to show an Israelite the love of God. However, I hope this concept is not foreign to you. For another would one day come, and he would do the same for you, and he'd do the same for me. And he would step down from his perfect and peaceful home, and he'd come to our home. He would walk a foreigner among a strange land, a place wrought with evil and malice, a place plagued with plagues and famine. And he would roam streets laden with the poor and the crippled, and he'd hear the shouts of suffering ring outside of the temple, and he would see those who were trapped and alone, isolated. And he would watch as those who would curse his father and would mock him and blame them for the circumstances that they were in. And he would go and he would search out and he would find those who had suffered for so long. It became a part of who they were. It dictated their steps, who they could talk to, what they could eat, where they belonged, which of course was nowhere. And he came and he watched all of this. And he saw all of this and he walked among us and he watched as you lost that loved one to an unpreventable cause. He watched as you suffered of loneliness and depression, your mind filled with anxiety as you hid underneath your sheets, afraid of the world in your bed. And he would hear your cries of pain at night. And he would watch the tears stream down your face. And he would stand by time and time again as you turned your back on him, as you walked away from him, pursuing anything that would numb the pain for you. And he walked, and he saw your suffering, and he saw your pain, and he chose you. And he looked at you and he said, "I want it all. I want it all." And he loved you. So much so that he walked to a cross. And it wasn't with a sweep of dismissal. It wasn't with a finger pointed at you, an accusation. It wasn't with an identity of sin. No, Jesus Christ went to the cross with his arms stretched wide. He embraced the world that put him there. And he suffered beside us so that we might have hope. He reached down into the darkest pits of our lives, and he's offered us a way out. In a very similar voice, he has said, do not urge me away from you, or to turn my back from you. No, where you go, I will go. Where you stay, I will stay. Your people are my people. And your God is my God. And for where you will eventually die, I already have. And there I was buried, for not even death could separate you from me. See, Jesus Christ does not promise a life without suffering. He promises a life while suffering together. So the question comes back, what do you do when you're suffering? What do you do when you're suffering? Do you dismiss everyone and isolate yourself? Do you accuse those around you and refuse to take responsibilities for the mess that you have made of your life? Or do you identify with your pain and listen to the lies that you aren't enough, or that you won't overcome your circumstance? The answer, as you might have guessed, is no. Absolutely not. So what do you do when you're suffering? You suffer beside each other. You embrace one another. You grab each other by the shoulders and you refuse to let go. Whether death or famine or pain or suffering, you hang on to each other. Put simply, you need a Ruth in your life. And I know my father took this one a little bit too literally, but it's true. You need someone in your life to bear your burdens beside you, to take the weight of your life and not to get rid of it. Not to take suffering completely out of your life, because then how would you grow? But you need someone to help you carry it. For I know there will be a time where your knees will shake, and your body will heave from exhaustion, and you will wonder why. You'll wonder how. And in those moments where there are these mountains of suffering standing in your way, you need someone in your life. You need a Ruth in your life. You need an Aaron or an Ian in your life. Jared, a Griffin, a Blake, a Jake. You need someone in your life that you can look to when you're about to give up and know that they will never give up on you. Men, get over your pride. Learn to be weak. Rely on others. You're not strong enough. Women, learn to see past your circumstances and the pain that I know surrounds your life. And find your identity in Christ. Find your strength in the people that He has placed beside you. For those of you who are similar to Naomi, whether in age or circumstance, you need a Ruth in your life. You need someone younger than you that continues to provide you with vitality and continues to urge you forward. However, you young people out there, like me, you need someone older in your life. You need someone to be able to tell you from their stores of wisdom and knowledge, their experiences. You need a Ruth in your life. But also, I know that you have a Naomi in your life. There are people that you know, people that you don't know, people that are sitting in this room, some of them right beside you, and they're suffering. And they may have just lost their job and they have no one to go to. Or maybe they're just addicted to something that just simply is not good for them. Or maybe, perhaps, they just got the call from the doctor. And the person that they love the most has just been diagnosed with that disease. Or perhaps it's the ones who are smiling, the ones who have it all together, the ones who hide behind their mask of happiness, too afraid to be real with the people around them because of how it will make them look. I don't know who these people are, but you do. And those people need you beside them. There are Naomis in your life that need you to suffer beside them for no other reason than just to be there. So pray with these people. Love these people. Listen to these people. But by all means, embrace these people. And sometimes it takes us taking the suffering in our lives and putting it aside for a second in order to help somebody with what they're going through. Like Ruth did for Naomi. You have a Naomi in your life. But maybe if we're being honest, that person is you. You've been trapped in a pit of sin and loneliness, and you are fighting your hardest not to drown in the darkness. You keep reaching for something to pull you out, but you keep grabbing onto things that just simply will not support you. You're looking for someone to embrace you. Jesus Christ is that person. See, God never promised that you wouldn't have any suffering. He simply sent Jesus so that you never have to do it alone. So let him embrace you. As I said earlier, I had the opportunity last summer to work with a bunch of students in Colorado. I met with all kinds of students, and they ended up teaching me quite a bit by the end of the summer. On the screen is a picture of one of my friends. His name is Thomas. And about a year before I met Thomas was hit by a car, and he had a stroke. And the stroke rendered the left side of his body paralyzed. His left arm was constantly tucked to his chest like a wing. His left leg remained relatively stiff, but he could talk really well. And all week we were at camp. He was a joy to be around. He was as happy as could be. And I had the opportunity to lead a group of about 20 students up a mountain near the camp's property. And so we began the hike, and we got to this meadow area where we divide the students into their groups. And sure enough, Thomas was placed in my group. And his youth leader came over to me, and he told me, hey, Thomas refuses to stay back here. All right, Thomas refuses to stay back, so will you keep an eye on him while we hike? And I said, yes, of course, and we went on our way. And on our way up the mountain, I watched as this 100-pound middle schooler hobbled up the mountain in front of me. And as the incline got steeper, I could hear his breathing hasten. I could see his movements grow more tired. But never did a smile leave his face. Never did an excuse or a complaint come out of his lips. And as we walked, he would occasionally trip on a tree root or a rock, and I would shout from the back of the line, hey, Thomas, are you okay? Do you need my help? I could carry your backpack for you. And through heavy breaths, he would say, no, just stay close and try and keep up. And I would smile, and we would carry on our way. We came to a part of the hike where the trees no longer grew and rocks could be found in the thousands. The terrain is much less stable, a lot harder to walk on. So sure enough, I would yell at Thomas. I would say, Thomas, you okay? Do you need my help? Sure enough, his polite response would come moments later. No, just stay close. Try and keep up. And the clouds hovered over us, and the park was as vast as ever behind us, and I could see the top from where we were standing. When all of a sudden, Thomas fell. And he caught himself with his good arm, and he got up and he brushed himself off, but I could tell that his face was wearing the pain from his fall. So I rushed up to him and I asked him, Thomas, are you okay? And people continued by us as we stood there. And I mean, I could see the top as a tear sprouted in the corner of his eye. And I thought to myself, man, we are so close, so close. He's done so well. Surely he doesn't want to go back down the mountain. And so I asked again, Thomas, are you okay? And he said through tears, come closer. And so I did. I leaned my head down to him, and he whispered in my ear, I can't do it. I can't do it. I'm by myself. And I looked past him, and there in front of him was a pretty steep incline and a rock that went up a little above my waist. For me, that was an easy step. For Thomas, it was impossible. And so he asked me, hands rubbed dry from his fall, will you help me? Will you help me? So I picked him up and I put him over my shoulder. I carried him to the top of the mountain and I set him down, and he stood stunned by the view in front of him. A look of pure triumph on his face as he looked out at the golden plains before us. And he turned to me, and with a smile bigger than I had seen all week, he said, we made it. We did it. And he went on to eat his lunch. Just stay close. Just try and keep up. People aren't asking you to handle all their problems. They're not asking you to solve their suffering. Like Thomas, they just want you to stay close, to keep up with them. For the time's going to come when they fall, when there's something in their life that just seems impossible, and it renders them hopeless. It's in these moments that they need your help. It's in these moments that they will ask you to lead through suffering. Let's pray. Dear Heavenly Father, thank you so much for this day, God. Thank you for giving us breath today and giving us life. God, I thank you for all these people that decided to come here today. God, I know a lot of them are suffering. God, I know a lot of them are going through things that I just don't understand. But God, I ask that they would rely on one another, that they would forget their pride, forget their image, and that they would look to others for their strength. God, we thank you so much for sending Jesus to die on a cross so that we don't ever have to suffer alone again. I thank you for sending him to embrace us. I pray that we wouldn't isolate ourselves or accuse others or identify with our pain, God, but I pray that we identify ourselves with you, God. We love you so much. In your name we pray. Amen.